Okay, it's 1 o'clock, so we can start our event. Good afternoon and welcome to you all to today's event entitled Should There Be Gender Quotas on Board?, which is a joint event between two distinct series of the Florence School of Banking and Finance, Women in Finance, and FDF Discuss. My name is Elena Carletti. I'm a professor of finance at Bocconi University and the founder and director of the Florence School of Banking and Finance. And I'm delighted to chair this discussion today also because I am myself a member of a board and therefore I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. The event will take place in the format of PF Discuss, which means it will develop around the motion, this house believes that there should be gender quotas in boards, and we will have two speakers, a proponent and an opponent, with the precise timing for the event. So each speaker will have initially 6 minutes for her motion, and then 3 minutes for rebuttal, and then we will open questions from the floor. Now let me welcome our speakers, and I would very much like to start by thanking them, both of them, for being here with us today. We have our proponent, Sylvie Goulard. She is the Deputy Governor at the Banque de France, and she has had this role since January 2018. And I understand that today she speaks in her personal capacity and not on behalf of the bank, clearly. Before this position at the Banque de France, Sylvie had, let me say, a European career, if I may call it this way, in particular the European Parliament, where as a member she was a rapporteur for two important reports, one on Eurobonds and the other on the role of the European Union in global finance. And both of these reports were actually her own initiative. And then she was a member of temporary commission on the financial crisis and tax matters that, for example, the latter one came up following the Panama Papers. The opponent is instead Renée Adams. Renée, apart from being a very long-term friend, she is a professor at Saïd Business School at the University of Oxford. And she also is a fellow of the European Corporate Governance Institute, and she's a senior fellow of the Foundation of Law and Finance Research Center at the Goethe University and the Asian Bureau of Finance and Economic Research. She is today acting as an opponent, but I would like to underline that Renée is not actually an opponent to the topic of diversity and gender, quite on the contrary. She has written a number of very important and influential papers on corporate governance, bank governance, and gender. And her work has the very good connotation of drawing not only on economics and finance, but also management and psychology. And finally, she has co-founded AFFECT, the American Finance Association Committee for Women, in 2015, and she has been chairing it until last year. So before giving the floor to Sylvie, I understand that we should run a poll. And then while we have the poll on the screen, let me also say that we want to engage in a debate. So what we would really like is that the people from home can participate with us. So please don't hesitate to write your question in the Q&A box in Zoom in the lower bar of the screen. So let me start with the first poll before we start hearing what our speakers have to say. Should there be a gender quotas on board? Yes or no? Please, let's vote, and then we will see the result, and we will see whether and how eventually the result will change at the end of the event. And Sylvie, now the floor is yours, and we have 6 minutes. Thank you very much again for being with us.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you, Renée, and all of you. I look forward for this nice debate. Well, I will speak in my personal capacity, as the Banque de France does not have a quota policy. I really believe that this house believes, I think it's the way I have to present it, that there should be a gender quota on boards. For many reasons. First of all, gender balance is a matter of rule of law and fairness, as equality is enshrined in all our constitutions and law. But it is also about a better use of talents. And there are studies in Norway, for example, on the law they have adopted. It was quite old already, 2006, on the company's board quota, and they showed that it does not lead to less profitable business. On the contrary, even if the first reaction of the male-only stock market may be negative at the beginning, women brought changes in how companies are managed. There is a business case for diversity. There is an association in Italy I like very much, Valore D. I did many things with them, but McKinsey also studied all this. So the main achievement, and this is one of my key messages, is not about gender only. The main benefit, if we manage through quotas to make things changes, is for the society as a whole. It gives also the institutions a better connection with the society. So this is the background. So I would like to develop 3 reasons to promote quota. The first one is that the alternative failed, and I'm going to show you a picture, which is a picture of the G7 in July 2019 in Chantilly, where they talked about diversity. This is the world without gender quotas. And as Greta Thunberg would say for climate, voluntary schemes are only blah, blah, blah. And we should not have an illusion. What is going on is a pink washing. There are a lot of speeches and charters or whatever in our institutions, but at the end, there is a defensive reaction from the people in charge to block the changes. If you look at the ECB, since the beginning, we had 93% of the members of the governing council who were men, only 1 female governor in Cyprus. And right now, we only have 2 women out of 25, Christine Lagarde and Isabelle Schnabel. I want to pay tribute to because they are fantastic, and 23 male members. And the idea is also, it was shown in a paper from the LSE about the Sweden Social Democratic Party, that the title of this paper is Gender Quotas and the Crisis of Mediocre Men. And it shows that some people believe quotas are not something acceptable in terms of fairness, but it's exactly the other way around. It's fair because it creates a threat to cozy arrangements between men. Quotas are efficient. In France, we adopted a law in 2011 imposing 40% of women in boards of large companies, and the landscape changed dramatically from 10% women in 2009 to 45% women now. In executive board, we don't have yet, the law is being discussed now, but we don't have yet rules. None of the largest companies in France, the CAC 40, are led by women, and only 20% of women are in leadership position. To conclude, don't believe that women don't like quotas. Look at the video made by Ursula von der Leyen for Stern magazine, Ich bin eine Quotenfrau, where Ursula and 40 other women like Margrethe Vestager are saying that they are proud to have got their job through quotas. So one of the lies about it is that, oh, you know what, women don't like quotas. But of course, quotas are not sufficient. We need also policies on wages, on education. We need to make sure that women or young girls are choosing math and all the careers, all the tracks bringing you to artificial intelligence and IT, etc. These are professions we need desperately in the financial world, and where women are underrepresented. And my last word, women are half of mankind, so it's a very specific issue, but all companies and institutions promoting women usually promote also better people with an handicap or LGBT plus people and people with migrant backgrounds. So if we don't want to see further male only, and I would quite say white male only meeting like this one, then let's be in favor of quota. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvie. If you could maybe, yes, thank you, stop sharing. I don't know, before going to Renée, if Nais, we want to show already the results of the poll. Not the first one. Do we have it? Okay, so we have 87% saying yes and 13% say no. So we have quite a majority of people participating in favor of quotas. And now if we can indeed show also the second question that we are posing before Renée starts. So if we can then show the second poll. Nice. So when discussing gender quota, should we make a difference between government and private boards? Yes or no? Okay, and this is of course a single choice. And now the floor goes to Renée for her opponent view.
All right, thanks very much for inviting me. So my answer to the question is no, for four main reasons. So first, I believe gender quotas are often proposed to solve problems they cannot possibly solve, such as low shareholder value. Second, gender quotas are often justified on the basis of flawed research and stereotypes about women and men. Third, I believe gender quotas are examples of lazy policymaking. Politicians pass them to avoid having to tackle the actual problems that lead to women's underrepresentation in leadership. And fourth, gender quotas place the burden of solving women's problems on the shoulders of women and specific types of organizations, for example, listed firms, instead of allocating the responsibility across society. Okay, so I'm going to elaborate on these arguments in more detail. So my view, based on my own research and, unfortunately, my own lived experience, is that women currently do not have the same rights as men. So I believe this is an urgent social and human rights problem that simply does not get the attention it needs. Now, the fact that women are relatively underrepresented on boards reflects the inequality that women experience. So you might say, well, gender quotas will help solve this problem. However, it is an unfortunate fact that most gender quotas are actually not motivated by concerns about the inequality women face, but by economic arguments. So for example, the stated rationale for California's 2018 gender quota is to boost California's economy. The quota actually goes on to cite literature that suggests that greater board diversity is associated with higher shareholder value in support of the quota. So the stated reasons for putting the quotas in place are that quotas can help shareholders and taxpayers. The arguments about, fairness towards women or benefiting women are completely secondary. So aside from the troubling fact that the emphasis on economic motivation suggests that the problems women face are not in and of themselves justification enough for action, quotas, I would argue, are essentially designed to fail at their stated missions. Gender quotas themselves cannot fix an economy or improve shareholder value. The literature on diversity and shareholder value that these policies cite, I would argue, is both inconclusive and also fundamentally misses the point. So what is the important point that this literature misses and these policies miss, I believe, is that women are not all the same, just as men are not all the same. And if women were all the same, so all one would have to do is to add women to boards to increase shareholder value, for example, then the fact that men have not done so, the men who sit on the boards and the executives in charge, suggests that, well, maybe they're not so smart. So you would think that if it were so easy, the men in charge would have figured out a long time ago that all they need to do is add a woman to the board to improve shareholder value. So by motivating quotas with economic arguments, I believe policymakers are stereotyping both women and executives as being all the same. And the fact that it simply cannot be that simple suggests that by framing it as being a solution to a simple problem, policymakers are setting women up to fail because they're saying, oh, we add women to the boards and shareholder value will go up. But what happens when it doesn't? So if quotas cannot solve economic problems, as I argue, what problems can they solve? And that's a question I don't know the answer to. I do not see an answer in the policy debate. So I believe policymakers are proposing a solution without asking what the question is. So why do they do it? Well, I think one clue might lie in the fact that taxpayers do not have to pay for quotas. All the policymakers have to do is to tell companies to add more women to their boards, and presto, problem solved. So quotas are pretty easy. So to me, this looks like a clear example of lazy policymaking. Now, you may say, so what? It's better to have some policy that could help women than nothing at all. So I think there are two problems with that argument. The first is that quotas may crowd out policymaking that actually tackles the real problems. The second is that quotas put yet another burden on women. So women have to be role models for the next generation of women. If you're part of the quota women, they have to save the companies on whose boards they sit. They also have to save the economies where they work. On top of this, women face daily struggles to survive in the middle of an epidemic of domestic abuse. They struggle to get recognition for their work and to be treated as equals. To summarize, my problem with quotas is that it is unclear what problem they solve. I believe their design reinforces stereotypes about women and men, and they divert attention away from the real problems that women face. So I'll end there.
Thank you, Renée. This is quite, I wouldn't like to use the word provocative, but this is quite strong as a statement, I would say. So let's see what Sylvie has to reboot. I don't know whether we first want to show the second poll and then I ask Sylvie to reboot if we can. Okay, so this is no, there is no difference between private and government or public board. So in a way, the discussion is equal for our audience as well. And then if we can show this, the other poll, and then we go to Sylvie for the reboot and then to Renée. Can we show the second poll? The third poll, I think it is. So if not the gender quotas, and this goes to the spirit of Renée's point, what else can be done to increase gender diversity on boards? And here multiple choices are possible. Implement and comply or explain a rule for gender quotas on board. More general diversity mandates for corporations and boards. Ask companies to publish gender diversity commitments, including on boards. A more general effort to develop the careers of women in private and public effort. This should be left completely to corporations who have to respond to share and other stakeholders. Thank you. And now the floor goes back to Sylvie for the reboot.
Yes, thank you, Elena. Well, you know what, the problem with what we just heard, Renée, is that you don't propose anything concrete.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that quotas are perfect, but when you say, for example, that taxpayers don't have to pay for quotas, but why should they pay right now for unfairness and unequal access to some positions, above all in the public services? And I would quite say, okay, it brings money to the company or it does not. And so what? As you said, I mean, there are two levels. One is the level of the rule of law and the principles, and on that we should continue fighting. I don't agree with you that the studies saying that diversity is bringing something positive are irrelevant, because we all make the experience, and there are many of them, so I don't want to argue too long, but it is clear that when you have a team composed with people with very diverse background, it's always better. And of course, we could stereotype women and by saying that we are all the same, but it's not true. We all know that it's not true. And the question is not if we are the same or not. The question is access to power position. It's access to leadership. It's to give women a chance to change. I can tell you that the way Christine Lagarde is dramatically changing the mood at the ECB, introducing new methods, new procedures, new topics such as climate change and biodiversity, for example, it's absolutely fantastic. I'm not saying that a man could not have done this. I'm just saying that she's doing, and she's doing it in another way, also because she's a woman. We are all diverse, but I don't accept the argument of stereotyping. To be honest, I don't care. What I observe is that it brought a change, and it is a positive one. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvie. Renée.
So do I respond to Sylvie's comments on my talk, or do I respond to Sylvie's talk?
As you, I would suggest both.
Okay,
but as you prefer.
All right. So so obviously we disagree, right? And on many dimensions. But on one thing, I believe we both can agree that fairness is important. Okay. Now, the motion was not how do we reach gender equality. The motion was should there be gender quotas on boards? And I don't believe that gender quotas on boards achieve fairness of the type that is necessary for women to have equal rights as men. Now, a couple of points. So one, in response to Sylvie's argument, so my concern about, as an economist, I believe very strongly in the importance of policy evaluation, right? So you implement policies, and one should be able to assess whether the policies are effective. Now, this goes back to my point, which you also argued, Sylvie, that these policies are very good, for example, at improving, shareholder value. For example, there's a business case argument. Well, I would disagree. So if you hold the policy up to a standard of improving shareholder value, then I would argue that we would have to, at some point, potentially recognize that some of these policies will fail, because they don't lead to improvements in shareholder value, which then means that the quota itself would fail, which then would suggest that implementing sort of fairness for women and men is not, something that we should ascribe to as a society, which is obviously wrong, right? So if you use business case arguments or economic arguments to motivate implementing policies that will lead to more fairness for women, then you have to accept that at some point the evidence may go against the economic motivation, right? Because, and I have some of this research myself that suggests that more diversity on boards does not necessarily lead to higher shareholder value. Now, as soon as you accept that that's a possibility, then what's the next conclusion? How do you evaluate the policy? Does it actually achieve its objective or not? So I have no problem if we motivated quotas by saying, look, your argument, we need more women in positions of power, and the quota is a way to achieve it. But I do have a problem if we do not accept that fairness itself is a motivation, and we have to make economic arguments to motivate the quotas. Because then when it comes to policy evaluation, we have to then recognize that these policies may fail in achieving these economic motivations. I also would quibble about the validity of some of the research that is cited in the policy debate. I believe the evidence is far less conclusive than people think. So.
But just understand, Renée, that we are on the same page. I think, you make the point that quotas are motivated with economic argument, and they're not then consistent in their result with the economic motivations. In particular, they tend not to, or not necessarily, you said, increase shareholder value. But ultimately, the question, I understand the, let's say, the logic and the importance of being coherent between the motivation and the final result of the policy. Because otherwise, as you say, when we then evaluate the policy, we may have a discrepancy, and that this plays against the quotas. But on the other hand, to which extent can the motivation, economic increase in shareholder, or at least not hurting the shareholder value? Because if it was hurting the shareholder value, it would be much more problematic. But it seems to me that there is no clear evidence that introducing quotas reduce shareholder value. So if we don't have a strong evidence in that dimension either, is this just in a way a problem of coherence between the motivation and the result? Or what else? Because I could also think that the motivation of economic argument can be a way in which quotas can be possibly more accepted. And that's one of the reasons why they've been used, this motivation, when introducing quotas.
Yeah, but I think that's fundamentally a problem, right? So if we have to package fairness for women in economic arguments, I think that's a fundamental problem with society, right? So that's
that I can take.
Number one. And second, so the evidence, okay, so like one of my currently most cited papers shows that more women on boards is actually negatively associated with shareholder value. Okay, that paper is not about quotas, but it calls into question this sort of facile interpretation of the like this argument that more diversity necessarily leads to greater shareholder value. It simply doesn't hold water, because I can show a study where it's not related to a greater shareholder value. Now, the important thing though is that when we interpret our evidence, we do not interpret this as a gender effect.
If I may, I'm a little bit troubled, because first of all, as you said, Renée, we agree on the main point, which is fairness. And for me, equal access, and I began with this argument, the implementation of the constitutional principles we all have in our countries, the necessity to give some content to the blah blah around, in my opinion, it is enough. Then we can discuss if it's good or less good. And my second point, I've never talked about shareholder values. I don't care about shareholder values in central banks, for example. Where is the shareholder value in the central bank? We have so many public institutions where we desperately need quotas, because institutions have to reflect what the society is. And it's also the reason why I strongly believe that we need also more people with migrant backgrounds, etc., etc. So we should not focus on shareholder value or not to do anything, because the problem is that your long list of questions and alternatives shows that you can always dream about progresses through some little disclosure on where we are. And meanwhile, the men keep the power.
Well, I believe you did mention the business case arguments, Sylvie. I think actually you went to those pretty quickly.
Yes, so, but as an addition to the main argument, which is fairness.
Yeah, so I mean, I believe if quotas are motivated on the basis of fairness, now one could also, talk about whether, having, should every government have a woman? Probably one could argue that that's definitely important, but should every company have a woman? I mean, I think that's an interesting question that one could talk about more, right? Because it's not obvious necessarily that, one also has to think about the reallocation, right? So if you put more women on boards, the women are not doing something else that they could be doing, right? And so, like, should we have more women in business instead of, for example, more women in art? That's a fundamental sort of overall question that I don't believe the policy discussion has looked at whatsoever, right? Because there is a reallocative effect by having more women in leadership positions, then you're taking them away from, and in specific types of leadership positions, you're taking them from
others. For men. It's the same for men right now. You have so many gray, serious little men, and maybe they would like to do something else in life. Maybe they are great artists and they were also stereotyped and not in the position to do what they were dreaming of.
Let me, not because I want to interrupt the discussion, but let me go to one point that Renée said. What about having one woman? So let me then pose to you the question by Rosa. What do you think about a recent German law requiring the presence of one woman, irrespective of the size of the board? And maybe we start with you, Renée, then we go to Sylvie, just as you mentioned it.
Well, I go back to my point. Like, okay, so what I would like to see is what is a specific problem that that such a quota is designed to achieve, right? So do we as a society believe that every board should have one woman? Then of course this kind of quota solves that problem, right? But if the quota is motivated, and I go back to this point because I would like to know what the motivation for this proposal is. If the quota is motivated by economic arguments, then I think, no, this is a flawed policy. right? So if we want, so like the fundamental problem in all of this debate is nobody says, why are there no women on boards? So informed policy making should basically say, why are there no women on boards? Let's fix those problems. So the solution to why are there no women on boards is not necessarily let's put a woman on every board. The solution might be let's give women more childcare. Let's eliminate domestic abuse. Let's de-bias organizations, right? But if you don't actually ask, what is the problem that we are trying to solve, you can't come up with an effective solution.
Sylvie.
Well, Renée, you, to a certain extent, you're an extremist because you don't believe that quotas can be part of a broader policy. Nobody said that. You can have quota and support for childcare or better education first. Second thing, I don't believe that one woman is a good solution. I even think it's a very bad one, because I have observed, maybe it's too empirical, how women react, or men, by the way, in the other situation. So you need to have several people interacting. And when you ask Renée, why don't we have more women at the top? Because of cozy arrangements between the men at the top. And the lazy solution for them is to recruit people who are like them. So the idea that you introduce difference, and I really believe that difference is good, not only for shareholder values, because it obliges us to think in a different way. I would say exactly the same with foreigners. I really believe that mixed teams with people, let's say in Europe, from the north and the south, with very different cultural, religious, educational backgrounds is as such something positive. So why should we say only one woman if we consider that difference and diversity is something positive for the institution as a whole? So that's the reason why the most simple thing is to say 50-50. Of course, if one day we have 40-60, it's not a big issue, but one woman, it's a little bit, you know, the monkey you show in the circus. Thank you.
Welcome. Sylvie, let me come to you. There were a number of questions that were raised by the participants when they actually registered. And some of them concern a little bit, if you allow me to use the word, limitations of quotas. And the typical, somehow, criticism about quotas is that this doesn't square with meritocracy, or not necessarily square with meritocracy. So the question that was posed, one of them, was how to avoid that the women are promoted because of the quota, even if they lack required qualification. So how do we deal with that issue?
It's a very serious issue, and I've been sharing these concerns for very long, to be honest. I spent the first half of my life believing this kind of argument. But I think the counterfactual gives the answer. Why do we believe that the current system is meritocratic when half of the talents of mankind are not used? I see no reason to believe that the system as it is does respect the very important meritocratic principle. So the key question is not, of course, to promote stupid women when you only have bright men. The question is, how can you make sure that you have good women candidates? And you know what? Experience shows that it is possible. If you discuss with headhunters who made the job in the years after the introduction of the law in France or the Moscow law in Italy on how to get more women on board, actually, you are looking more for women than before. So you make an effort. And because you make an effort, you respect meritocracy. Of course, the goal should not be, once again, to put your wife, your girlfriend, or whatever, as some political parties did for elections, which is, of course, the bad example. I'm not saying that all quotas are functioning well, but if you do it in an intellectually honest way, it is feasible. I remember when I used to work with Romano Prodi at the European Commission, the Prodi Commission was not gender balanced. And I asked the president several times, why don't you try to make it more gender balanced? And he told me at that time, it was 20 years ago, so girls keep the hope. 20 years ago, the idea that the president of the commission would ask each member state to send 2 names, 1 man, 1 woman, was completely unacceptable. And now it's what Ursula von der Leyen did, and rightly so. And the ones who are not taken are not dead because they are not taken. It's a competition. And so I really believe we can combine meritocracy and quotas.
Thank you. I don't know if you, Renée, you want to respond to the same question, but let me pose a slightly different one. Still within the quotas, but also on the broader, if you want, solutions that you seem to be suggesting, which goes to the core of fairness. Anything that you can do to sort of positively discriminate somebody or help somebody, support somebody, of course, it creates a reaction in the other group which is not supported. So, and sometimes, I mean, I think we all are professionals in our respective fields and jobs, and we all may have heard men making funny comments sometimes. Now, oh, you are there because of the quotas, or now we can't have a career anymore because now only women can make career, this type of things. So what can we do to sort of, I wouldn't say avoid, but minimize at least this part of the reaction? Can policies be done in a different way, or what do you think it could be a way of reducing this aspect of quotas or any other supporting policy to women?
Yeah, I think, so this is really an important issue. And this, I think, also gets back to the meritocracy and also in some sense to the business case argument, right? Because adding women to boards, regardless of how good they are, it doesn't matter if the rest of the board doesn't take them seriously, right? So you need to work as part of a group. Some women are able to effectively own their quota woman status, but other women can't. And, you know, so I've recently done some research among finance academics where we document that there is backlash, right? So, so people do not like quotas. There's backlash against women. And of course, a lot of women, as a result, may feel very uncomfortable in the profession. And this is a serious problem that we have to recognize. And so my view on this is, and, you know, I could also speak to whether women are better. So I believe that actually, you know, well, anyhow, lots of things one could say, but my view on this is the way that we should frame these things is we should step away from the economic arguments, and we should frame everything as the importance of debiasing organizations. Now, you know, because otherwise you're always going to be on this territory where people will argue that the women are not good enough. And as Sylvie pointed out, if the men are sort of like appointing people who are like them, then the definition of being good enough means you are like the men, right? So, and you can never like fight against this argument, but I think everyone can be on board if you say, look, what we need to do is debias the organization. We need to debias the recruitment process. We need to debias as much as we can, sort of like how the organization is run. And I don't see how you could possibly argue against that, right? Now, of course, if you say, well, let's debias the organization, and it turns out then in some cases you have more men, in some cases you have more women, I think everyone can live with that. Right? Because you've made a concerted effort to actually say, well, let's be fair, right? So then it's about fairness. And it's not about, you know, well, let's just like impose, you have to have so and so many women, so and so many men in the group, and now you guys all work together and achieve a better outcome. Like, I don't see how that's like, you know, feasible. I would hate it if people tell me who I have to work with, right? Regardless of who they are, right?
Sylvie. You're on mute, I'm afraid.
I hope you can hear me.
Now we can, please.
No, 2 points. First of all, Renée, the best way to debias an institution is to get the power to change it. I have no doubts that when you are at the top, you can much better change it than preaching from outside, oh, you should debias it. My second point is on men. We should stop, and because it is not at all, at least for me, my vision that you have men on one side and women on the other side. You can have many people sharing exactly the same wish, which is to change the society, to transform it, to change the conditions of work in an institution or a company. I know so many men who are very glad that because of programs meant to support women with children, they can also take a paternity leave or have more time for their own children or take care of their own mother, things they were not allowed to admit some years ago. So for me, it's not we need to become like they are. I'm not sure. As soon as you introduce change and diversity, you can also have a phenomenon, Renée, and we should be positive on that, that people change around the table and that some of the people supposed to be on the other side actually are closer than you think. And this is this transformation process, which is interesting. Of course, I would prefer the society to change by itself and that we respect all the rules. And in Italy, for example, everywhere you have the sentence that the rule is the same for all in the courts, but we all know that it is not true. So the idea is to take a decision that is introducing something, a new kind of imbalance, if I may say so, and then you redistribute the roles. And I really believe that it is feasible, men and women together, and not women against the men.
No, on that I fully share. This is not a battle of sexes, if we can say so. This is not. I mean, it has not to become a struggle between the two. But I think I may say, if I may say that, Sylvie, that this may also differ across country, because I think, for example, France, it's fair to say, is much more advanced than in this particular part of the discussion, which is the role of the men and the support the men give to the change. I think other countries are a bit more behind, if I may say. But I fully agree with you. The desire should be that somehow quotas or any other public support measure for diversity, not just for women ultimately, should really induce a cultural change and therefore create more harmony between all the parties and not just struggles between them. In that, Renée, let me ask a question, given that you come more from the researcher side. There are at least, I mean, I'm not fully maybe 100% familiar with this field, but I think I've read the research that introducing quotas in boards, now leaving aside the stakeholder, shareholder value, in particular whether it goes up or down, going back a little bit to the meritocracy argument, that actually has also improved the criteria for the appointment of men in boards, not just for women. Meaning that because in particular there was the idea and the attempt to have good women, this has had a spillover effect on the selection procedure of men. Would you agree with that or not?
Yeah, so I think the research shows that selection processes have become more professional, right? But this sort of gets to my point that one can debias organizations. So what's a professional recruitment process? It's a process where you've thought about, what are potential biases that could arise and how we currently do things. And then let's try to design a process that is less biased, right? So, it's obviously it's true that gender quotas can have positive effects. For one, it might cause firms to think about things differently, right? And this might be a result, right? But then my argument, and I agree with Sylvie here, that if you have power, you can change things, is we should focus on doing more, right? So, let's professionalize recruitment processes. We can do this without a quota, right? It's not necessarily to have a quota to professionalize a recruitment process. We can actually just say, let's professionalize a recruitment process. Okay, which I think is a better approach than saying, well, let's have a quota, and then as a byproduct, maybe there'll be some good practices. Why not tackle the problem directly? If the problem is that people are only appointing people who are exactly like themselves, and there's a perpetuation of power, why don't we try and think about, if there's a better way of appointing directors to boards, for example?
I think Sylvie responds.
May I? Yeah, no, but I agree with you. Ideally, certainly, but you cannot completely ignore the fact that we are starting from the current situation, and that in the current situations, the people deciding on the procedure to recruit someone or to choose the chair of a body or to enter in whatever process of recruitment, appointment, whatever, are not diverse. So at a certain point, if you want to go, it's not necessary to have quotas. But what I observe every day in the central banking world is that I can tell you it's not a glass ceiling. It's a well-controlled system where they keep the keys. So if the law does not introduce a change for the highest possible constitutional reasons, they are not going to give the keys in a voluntary way.
Yeah, I must say, not because I want to stay on the side of Sylvie, but I also see quotas more as a way to break the system, and to break the system quickly if you want. And if we could go your way, Renée, I think, and despite what Sylvie said before on I'm happy to be a quota or not, I think we all would prefer not to have quotas, at least I speak for myself. I would prefer that we would not need quotas to change the system, but perhaps is an easier and a quicker way of doing it. And on that, let me move on to another topic, which is how does this then should or has indeed somehow moved down to the level of management? Because what is true, in particular in the financial sector, is that we have had quotas on board, and clearly the number of women on board has changed either for quotas or for other reasons. But what we haven't seen is the effect that maybe was desired when quotas were designed, which is how this then cascade down to the organization. So at the level of the management, we haven't seen, in particular in the financial sector, a big improvement. So does it mean, and now let me go to Sylvie first, does it mean that we would need quotas also at the management level, not only at the board level? Or what would you think?
Yes, personally, I think it should be a question for all professions and all levels. When I observe that in the schools or in the hospitals, you have only women, I'm not sure it's the best possible choice for the society. I really believe, once again, that diversity is always better than male-only or female-only approach. And that's the reason why I really believe it could be envisaged at other levels, but I'm not a specialist as Renée is. My main argument, it's like the red hammer you have in the train to allow you to break the window if there is an emergency. I think we have reached such a point of unfairness after so many blah, blah, once again, at least the generations before, they were completely cynical. They were not spending their time adopting diversity charters or making speeches on gender. So for me, the best reason to do it is to break the situation as it is, and with one only message: enough is enough.
Renée, would you have a view on this?
Yeah, well, I guess my question is, why would one expect that a gender quota on boards would trickle down? And this gets to my point that we have to ask what the question is, right? So a gender quota on boards addresses the specific issue that there's not enough women on boards, one might argue, right? So you say, oh, there's not enough women on boards, so let's put more women on boards through a quota, and that actually solves that problem, right? But it doesn't solve the problem, I would argue, that women are systematically treated unfairly, that they lack career advancement, of which the fact that they're underrepresented is a reflection, right? So if you say, well, look, we need more diversity at all levels, I just don't think that gender quotas will solve that problem. So you have to come up with other policies, but first, to come up with the other policy, you have to understand what the problem is, right? So like, if, so the fact that women are underrepresented on boards is, of course, a reflection of the fact that there are very few women in lower down in management positions, right? If there were more women in management positions, then there would be more women on boards. Actually, I have research showing precisely this. So then the question is, well, why do some countries have very few women in management positions? And this is a question of culture, of course. It's a question of how women are treated, how women are perceived, what opportunities they have. You don't solve that problem by simply putting a gender quota in place. You solve that problem by having an effective system of policies that provides women with more opportunities to advance. And in countries where women do have more opportunities, there are more women on boards, and you don't even need the quota. So I guess, why should we expect this to trickle down? I don't see there to be any reason for it.
Well, maybe because you could expect, for example, that when women are in boards, and now I'm talking more about the private sector, they may be sitting in remuneration committee, in governance committee, and therefore they could point more to the managers that would typically be, at least in the starting moment, would typically be more men. They would just raise their hands and say, hey, but have you taken care of gender diversity or diversity more in general in your promotion process, for example? Have you remunerated equally the same? So I think it's more likely that if there are women in the board, this mechanism would be triggered than if there aren't. That's the idea of the cascade.
If I could respond to that. So first, one problem I have with this is this gets back to one of my points that we're basically putting all the burden on women to fix the problems of women, right? Okay, so that's one thing. And then second, I don't know about you, but I'm a passionate advocate for gender equality, right? So I co-founded the Women's Committee for the American Finance Association. And let me tell you, that is a very tough fight, right? So you try to advocate for diversity, in your board, and you are immediately, or in your department or in any sort of group, you will be branded as a feminist who can be dismissed, right? People will not take you seriously. And it is a very hard fight to fight. So I think, asking women to go out and fight all these fights that are incredibly energy consuming is a bit much, right?
But Renée, I agree with you, and we all know what you did in your studies, and nobody's putting you in a defensive corner for that. But I can tell you that it works. And it is also a great fun when you are in the position to change things. Don't believe it's only a burden. Don't believe it's great when you are in the position to promote young, good women who were too shy to even be a candidate to a job. So I would not present it only as a burden. And by the way, to laugh a little bit, I like very much the figures of the global gender gap of the World Economic Forum, saying that if we don't do anything, it will take 267 years to close the gap in the wage gap. So I prefer to take the burden. I have 3 girls at home, my 3 daughters, and do the job myself to prepare a better world for them. Because if no one does, and once again, I've never said it's just for women. It can be also a joint work made by men and women together, because we have introduced a certain uneven situation for some of them.
Well, I think you're misinterpreting me, Sylvie. I didn't say that it was just a burden. And, actually, I as I said, I am a passionate advocate for gender equality. So I have implemented change, and I do so, with great passion and increased determination, because I see more and more inequality. But I don't think that we should expect every woman to want to fight this fight, right? It should be a choice. Not everyone wants to go to work and say, well, now I have to fix the problem that some woman is treated unequally, right? Because we're basically asking women to do, not only their own jobs, but also to fight the fight, right? So I think it should be a choice. And we shouldn't rely on the fact that having women on boards will necessarily lead to
when you're in a leadership position, it's not a choice. It's your duty to manage the institution or the company and to take the right decision. It's not a choice.
Men can do it too. So then men could do it too.
Yeah.
So why do the women?
I'm not saying the contrary. I'm just saying, why do you identify it just as a burden for women? I don't think so.
I didn't, Sylvie. You are misinterpreting me. I didn't say it's just a burden. I'm just saying that women should have a choice whether or not they want to advocate for women specifically. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, let me just ask one final question, and then there is the final statement, I'm told. So the first question is, if we look at the future, we have been talking a lot about women, but of course we all meant also diversity more in general. So the first question is gender quotas, a road leading to diversity quotas. And while you answer this question, why don't you then give also the final statement? Maybe we go in reverse order this time. We start with Renée and then we go to the Sylvie, and then we do the last poll. Please, Renée.
Right, so can you repeat the question?
Whether gender quotas are a road leading to diversity quotas. So whether in general, even if you're not a proponent of quotas, whether you think that somehow the topic going forward will be more diversity more generally and not just gender. If you understand.
Oh, I see. Well, I mean, gender, yeah, I guess I'm not totally sure what so will gender quotas lead to other diversity quotas? I mean, it's possible, right? I mean, people are talking about racial diversity. You can talk about age diversity. I mean, let's be honest, there's many dimensions of diversity that go beyond gender. And this gets back to my point that women are not all the same, right? So there may be women who identify as men, and there may be men who identify as women. So men and women are not all the same. There's many dimensions of diversity. Yeah, you know, you could think about there being multiple types of quotas, right? Which I think then would be very difficult for organizations to manage, right? Because diversity is not always immediately evident from physical appearance, right? So yeah, so I think that's potentially problematic. But, you know, let me also restate that, you know, I'm a fundamental believer in fairness, right? And for me, the question is, how do we get there? And also, I believe very strongly that we should have more discussions about how do we get there instead of just saying, well, let's just have a quota that'll solve all problems. I don't think that that's true.
Okay, Sylvie, the last minutes, and then we go to the result of the previous polls. And
no, Renée, it's good that you conclude this way, because I think that no one ever proposed in this discussion just to have quotas and that's it. No one is on this line, and at least it's not my position. And I fully agree with you that what matters is fairness. And for this reason, we should make the difference between the principle and the procedure or the ways to get to our common objective. And fairness should remain the objective. And no one can say that in our societies, and to be honest, Elena, France is a fantastic country where women have access to childcare and many facilities, but by far we are not perfect. And we are not perfect on women, and we are not perfect on people with other ethnic backgrounds. We are not even allowed by our constitution to have statistics, which makes it very difficult to have the right policies, but it is also in the mind. So I don't pretend that quotas are the solution for everything, but I'm really sure that we have a lot to do to improve fairness in our societies. And the more we will have migrations and movement of population, not least because of climate change, the more we have to get prepared to a cultural shift in our minds. Fairness is really something worth fighting for. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm reminded that we should be looking at the result of the last poll that we did. So you see what the majority, I think, was a more general effort to develop the career of women, ask companies to publish gender diversity commitments. This is actually part, I think, of the ESG that we will see more and more, in particular in companies, that were some questions we had, but we were unable to cover them. More general diversity mandates for corporation, implement a compliant to explain. But I think a more general effort is certainly the winner somehow of the potential policies that could be adopted. Can we go to the last poll? And I apologize if I have missed, but I was so engaged in the discussion that I missed the poll question. So the closing motion, should there be a gender quotas on board? Let's see quickly if the participant can see responses, so we see if there has been a change relative to the initial one. And Nais, you can tell me when we have the result, please. So in the meantime, while we're waiting for the result of the last poll, let me thank both of you. It has been a fascinating discussion for me. I don't think that we are, I shouldn't be taking part any side here. I don't think that the two speakers ultimately were so I think they are both very advocates for women's rights and the role in the society and the profession, just simply looking at different ways to get there. But certainly, I think, Renée, you yourself said that you are a passionate advocate for women's rights, and you, Sylvie, you are doing a great job in your role for supporting the role of women. So I want to thank you both on the side of the gender, if you allow me to say that. And I think we can also avoid looking at the last poll, but
we thank the moderator.
Thank you. You see here, so we have now 84% of people on the board that are still in favor of gender quotas. But Renée, don't take it anyway as something that you have not convinced the people. I think it's not that you are against it. Is only that you don't want this to be the only tool. And I think on that, I think there is a broad agreement between the three of us, I may say.
Well, that and plus I dislike policies that, the fact that we can't say the policy is there to help women, the fact that we have to say the policy is there to help firms or economies.
No, that I can take the point. That I can take the point. And we shouldn't be seen as a solution to shareholder value. I think exactly. That we can all agree. But it's good to see that maybe we don't damage shareholder value. I think that is also something that we should be proud of, if you think.
Well,
we can reassure some people who would be skeptical without that. It's more an accompanying measure than the center of the debate. But thank you to our moderator, Elena. Thank you so much for the Florence School of Banking for this.